So we're going to move on to our next agenda item, which is item number 7, the reopening guiding direction. And I know there's been quite a bit of work on this. We'll turn the time over to you, Superintendent, and give a little background of why we're here and why we're bringing this up and what our objective is. So, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've been working on guidance for quite some time now, and I'm sure that my colleagues can echo this, that I have a folder full of guidance from all over the place, and people are developing guidance and putting out as fast as they can and then revamping and changing. We have been at the table with our local health leaders and a variety of community leaders from time to time, and it just seems like everybody's looking for answers and wanting to do so in a way that they feel that they have coverage going forward. So in the advisory groups, for example, when I met with the superintendents, they are very clear about the things that they're concerned about and need just minimum expectations. So, and by expectations, that's really what they're saying is requirements. And then they also want some guidance that they have flexibility in. So really trying to differentiate what is required, what is just helpful guidance, and what is the way forward, and who has what role in making that determination. And those have been the things that have been a little challenging. So I appreciate that board members Hanson, Earl, and gosh, I'm just having a brain cramp. Who else was on the call? There were 4 on the call. Anyway, 4 board members were on the call with the health department. Board member Lair, I'm sorry, and I'm sure there was another one I'm forgetting. Anyway, they're having our board members on the call and really.
Jenny was on the call.
Jenny Gravitt. See, I knew. Jenny, I'm so sorry. After my board report, I'm a little brain dead, so I'll regroup here. So the 4 board members who were on the call were able to have dialogue with and interact with members of the state health department, and some of those from the state department actually serve on the Utah Leads group as well. And then we had members from local health departments on, and Lexi Cunningham representing a district and USSA soon to be. So having that dialogue about what is needed and everybody moving forward, I think helps us be clear about the kind of document we want to put together. So today our purpose is to show you a very rough draft of the kind of guidance document we're talking about, and then also talk about the where it becomes a requirement and how we lean in to make that decision. And then we have this is an action item because we have an ask of the board that in order for us to continue to move forward, we feel like we need to push pause, which was, I believe, a request of the board as well, and just make sure that you can approve the way forward given our work with these various groups. And it has been messy, I guess is the best word to talk about it at times, in just trying to figure out who has authority over what. I know we spent some time this week after last board meeting, for example, talking about what does a governor's executive order mean if the word guidance is in there. So if an executive order is given over a guidance document, then does that become a requirement? And Brian and Michelle did some work for us digging into that a bit. So we're just happy to entertain questions. But before we do that, I want to turn it over to Tiffany and Melissa, who have really been working on this document. Just a reminder that we have various staff members working on a lot of things with COVID-19. So we're all leaning in. But when it comes to communications, Tiffany and Melissa are working on this. So I think, Tiffany, you're going to drive some conversation around the document.
Yes. So Tiffany Stanley, Chief of Staff. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So as opposed to walking you all the way through it, which will probably just make you dizzy, we'd like to just note a couple of items and then jump to one specific framework that we're developing. So that being said, we're happy to take questions or walk through anything specific based on your interests. So just want to emphasize that this draft and first version is focused on planning and communication and health and safety. And by health and safety, I mean implementing the color-coded phase guidelines and providing clarity around authority and process for reopening decisions. We started here since reopening in a way that's safe and in alignment with state and local health department directives is really foundational. Everything sort of flows from there, and from a clear understanding of what those pieces are. But this circular graphic here shows the other elements that the guidance will address as it's built out over the coming week. As Superintendent Dixon mentioned, this is definitely a living, breathing document that we're still developing. And even when we publish version 1, we'll regularly update it as the situation evolves and circumstances change, which they are every day. And I want to emphasize, some of you have provided feedback that hasn't yet been fully addressed or incorporated. So that those conversations will need to continue. Also, format-wise, note that when we do finalize the content, we plan to publish it in a way where it will be much more digestible, graphically appealing, and interactive, as opposed to just this big, lengthy document. And we hope to have it live on our website so that it's in a better format that way. So we definitely feel a huge sense of urgency to get this finalized. LEAs are fully engaged in their planning efforts, and some have goals to publish plans as soon as July 1st. So we have been working feverishly to kind of make sure that what we're providing actually is responsive to what LEAs are needing, as opposed to just adding to the pile of ideas and resources and thoughts. So, I mean, one of the most pressing needs is to clarify what each of the K-12 color-coded phased guidelines mean for schools, and provide LEA's recommendations and considerations from an educational or instructional perspective. That's really where we can, as USBE, can lean in. So to that point, I mean, that's where a lot of the challenges have arisen, as Superintendent Dixon mentioned, where there's maybe not as much clarity to kind of build something out in as clean a way as we'd like. But we want to jump to a sample that outlines what this guidance could look like for just one of the guidelines in the color-coded phased guideline document from the state. And that is the guidance related to enhanced cleaning and hygiene. So Jeff is jumping down to it. We're almost there. But right there, that one. Let's stop on that one. Yeah. So this legend emphasizes kind of one of the key challenges and also a really important piece, which is clearly delineating requirements to which entities are legally bound from guidance, which are just recommendations on implementing requirements, and then considerations, which are really just ideas to think about as decisions are made. And you know, this is where we need further dialogue to kind of flesh some of these pieces out. But we wanted to give you an idea of what this could look like. We've formatted this probably 10 or 12 different ways, and we may end up formatting it a little bit different depending on your feedback and how things progress. But if you want to go to the next page, and I will turn it to Melissa Cano. I don't know if she's spoken to you all yet, but many of you have met her. She's our new-ish Director of Strategic Communications, and I am just so flippin' grateful that we got her when we did. She has great experience and background, including in crisis communications, and so she is a great resource and support at this time. And I will just turn it over to her to quickly provide an overview of this format.
Melissa.
Hi, thanks, Tiffany, and good morning, board members. I apologize I'm meeting so many of you for the first time virtually like this. My start time just coincided right with the start of the pandemic. So it's been an interesting time to take everything on. But like Tiffany said, I have a background in emergency management and crisis communications. So setting some of the stages for these types of conversations, something I'm semi-familiar with. Obviously, the pandemic is new to everyone, but we had a lot of feedback from multiple board members. Some really wanted to see the 4 colors as part of it. Some wanted to see it singled out by individual color and what does it look like. And so this was one approach we took that it's encompassing a lot of things in one page. And hygiene and cleaning is probably one of the most robust topics that we would need to hit on. We have about a dozen topics that would be that high level topic supported by a requirement. So if you look at your left side, your left column, which says hygiene and cleaning, and it has that red check mark per the legend. Right now, in the Utah Leads Together phase guidelines, it does say that when schools are open, there must be an increased cleaning and hygiene regimen in place. And therefore, that is our law that we lean on to then go forth and provide guidance and considerations. And looking at the moderate and low risk, the way that we defined it, if you look just below the titles, we were trying to think of a simplified way to define each level. So moderate risk, we're saying schools are closed, remote and small group learning is allowed. And in low risk, we're saying schools are open, but with a rigorous mitigation measure in place. And then when we jump into normal, schools are open, and it's never that they will be open in the same way, but that enhanced cleaning and hygiene regimen does stay with us. So moderate and low, in following the Utah Leads Together document, have a lot of similarities. And as we discussed, the way schools can look, whether they're open whether it's that rigorous mitigation measure in yellow, or whether they're open for even just a few students at a time in that small group setting. Regardless of that, the hygiene and cleaning considerations should remain the same. And so these were some of the considerations we came up with, as well as received from many of you. And we tried to put it in a one-stop shop format. In high risk, there will be things that schools need to maintain. Obviously, it's not the same because there are no students on campus and no staff on campus in that situation. But this is what we came up with to try to give you an overview of what is actually required by law. Where does our guidance and considerations fall in under that? I know that we have upcoming meetings this week with more health department folks, and we're hoping to kind of flesh out a little more of these 3 digestible steps of requirement, guidance, and consideration. But I feel like if we can align those 3, regardless of what the level is, we can actually find a sound place where we can all contribute and set up everyone for success out locally. We just want to make sure that we are giving these considerations and that they are known considerations that still allow for local flexibility. So this is one item we put together and wanted to show you today.
So I think with that, Chair Huntsman, we'll turn it to you for questions and potentially motions.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have some hands up. Board Member Davis? Your hand up from before?
It was up from before, but I want to just thank our staff, especially for clarifying to our LEAs which things are requirements and which things are considerations, because I think there's been some ambiguity, even as recently as our last board meeting, where, as Superintendent mentioned before, we were talking about guidance, but since then we've learned some new things about executive orders and how those are not necessarily optional. So from the beginning, my request has been clarity of communication, and that our LEAs know what is required and what is guidance and consideration. And so I appreciate a more user-friendly type of format chart. If we do continue with this type of format with the executive order pieces on the left, I just want to make sure we include them all and not just a handful, so LEAs know this is required. So that's my feedback. Thanks for all the work on this.
Okay, Board Member Scott Hansen.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully my video and audio are working now. I've had some technical difficulties. We all right?
I can hear you. That's what's most important to me. You're a handsome man. I know what you look like. So that audio is real important. So
probably
we're
better
good.
just to be heard and not seen. I would like to thank board members and staff too. I know there've been a lot of people involved, and it was actually very enlightening to be involved with that phone call last week with the various health department and education community folks. So thank you to the superintendent for putting that together. I do have a motion I'd like to put forward, and I don't know if Jeff or Lorraine or someone has that. I think we have it typed up.
It's on the screen now. It's
Okay.
a little different than what I've got in front of me, but I can see this. So.
The one that I sent out, I think someone's just formatted it a little bit. Let me check and see. But the motion that I'll put on the table is I move the board authorize Superintendent Dixon and USBE staff with board member involvement to move forward in working with the state and local health departments, state and local departments of health to clearly define minimum statewide health and safety requirements for LEAs for each of the Utah Leads Together phased health guidelines applicable to schools by color-coded risk level, and to continue identifying best practices, developing model policies, and providing purchasing and other assistance related to health and safety, making education happen, and other pandemic-related issues in order to provide leadership and support for LEAs for reopening schools, and that the superintendent shall consult with the board regularly to gather feedback and approvals and update requirements and guidance as necessary.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that. This is Board Member Earl.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Do you want to speak more to the motion, Board Member Hansen?
If I can,
Yes, please.
I think it's been clear over the past few weeks that LEAs are looking for minimum requirements so that they can do their planning, so that they can look at budget impacts, so they can carry on with and anticipate all the tasks that are ahead of them. So we need clarity rather than ambiguity. That's why in the motion it does say that we will define minimum statewide requirements for LEAs, in addition to the guidance and the other information that's out there. It's also clear that the health department on its own will have difficulty because of their organizational structure in developing those minimum requirements for schools without USBE assistance. And I think that we need to step into that space. I know we've had a lot of interaction there, but we need to formally step into that and help the health departments to help us in getting those requirements together. Also, it's clear that the health departments are the ones setting those requirements, and we need to have their authorization to move forward with those requirements. Risk management is also a part of this. If we have a clear framework for the schools to operate in, they will clearly be covered under the risk management, the state risk management. If the schools are off doing their own thing, then they'll have to justify that with risk management on a case-by-case basis. So I believe that a more central approach makes sense for that. And this is, as I said, the foundation for planning and budgeting for the schools and for us. This does not mean, though, that the local LEAs don't have a lot of flexibility in implementation and in possibly even getting waivers if there are things they just can't meet. I envision that they could work with their local health departments, talk to them about the exceptions that they see and the waiver that they may need, get their buy-off, and then come back to USBE for waivers of certain things if they're in that situation. But I'll let other board members comment.
Thank you. So discussion from board members. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Yeah, I appreciate Board Member Hansen's work on this and his explanation of why he chose to use the word requirements in the first section of his motion. I would, however, like to amend that so that we move that less to requirements. The requirements are in the executive order in they're termed as guidelines or recommendations. I can't remember guidelines, but those are the requirements. And then we can add to those requirements with guidelines or guidance to, and I think that is more clear as to what our role in this is. And then the idea of having LEAs come to us with waivers as they see fit seems like a very time-consuming process that wouldn't necessarily benefit the overall implementation of this. I think LEAs want and would appreciate the guidance that would be provided, but I don't think making it a requirement just provides more necessity to monitor and creates the necessity for waivers that I don't think are necessary. So I would like to make a motion to amend the motion. I move to amend the motion by replacing the word requirements on that section 1 to guidance, and then remove the word requirements and in section 3.
Okay, we have a proposed amendment. Is there a second?
I'll second that. Chair Huntsman, Mark Marsh.
Okay, thank you, Board Member Marsh. Did you want to speak any more to your proposed amendment?
Just the wording and the amendment allows our motion to match better the documentation that we have. It matches the fact that the requirements are at the governor's level with the little check mark requirement, and the rest are guidance and considerations. And so if we go with a motion that talks about, elevates our document to requirements, it changes kind of the whole conversation in a way that I think is not necessary. So thank you.
Okay, any other discussion to the proposed amendment? We have a proposed amendment here. Board Member Lear.
And I would oppose that amendment. I think there is guidance of the yin yang. When Scott, Jenny, and I were on the call on Tuesday, the use of guidance and guidelines and guardrails was constant, and there was no one willing to say this is what yellow in a school district or school looks like. That's, I think, what Scott is aiming for. But I have heard the need for, it doesn't take away authority from the local health departments, because the local health departments still say, Summit County, you're in green or you're in orange. It could change from day to day. But where I think it's helpful for LEAs to say, if you are in green, this is what a school looks like. And I think that's where there is no other entity that has the knowledge, the insight, the familiarity with schools to not just give guidance, but to be able to tell principals, superintendents, local board members, once your health department says, this is the color you're in, here's what your schools look like. I don't think that is oppressive. I think it is someone stepping up to the plate, which in that meeting no one was doing, to say, here's what you look like as a school. And I think that is helpful. And if we change this to guidance, I think we should throw out the whole thing, because we put out guidance in 15 different formats in the last 4 weeks. And I think that is no longer helpful. I think the state board is that with the constitutional authority for the public education system is the right body to put the health departments in charge of the appropriate safety level, but then provide direction about what that means. So I oppose the change to guidance. I would rather not have one more guidance document. I would throw out the whole thing. It takes away the full meaning for me to change requirements to guidance.
Okay, board member Jenny Earl.
I'm going to agree with Carol on this. There is a lot of ambiguity. Parents uncertain. That's how many emails we keep getting all these emails because there's some uncertainty. And of course, this is referring to minimum. What is the minimum requirements that a health department is going to require happen at each of those codes? If it's just guidance, then it isn't clear whether or not that is necessary or not necessary. And I think a number of entities, including parents as well as school district officials, want to know where is the boundary, where's the line. And of course, once again, looking back at this, just keep in mind, we are talking minimum requirements. What does this have to look like so that they can build around that?
Board member Davis, did you guys aren't taking your hands back down once you put them back up, or I mean, once you.
I do. I guess, is it appropriate to ask a clarifying question?
Yes, you can.
I guess I'm asking from the sponsors of these motions. What I am understanding from the original motion, how it would change with this amendment, I think the original intent of the motion was that we would have some opportunity for input to the health department. They come out with the final say of the requirements. They may listen to us, they may not, but this is saying we will give some input. An example in my mind would be something like, if they say everyone has to be 6 feet apart when schools start, we may give the input to ask them to add the word "or within reason," because we know in some educational situations, it's going to be a little tricky. That word is already in there, but I'm just using that as an example. Now, that would be number one. So that would mean we would give some input to the requirements that come out of the health department, knowing that they have final say and that that's going to be the executive order, and those will be mandates. The second one I understand as our part, once those requirements come out from the health department, whether they listen to us or not, then our responsibility will be to create guidance. Here are some ideas of ways that schools can meet these requirements from the health department. I'm understanding these motions that we're not going to be adding more mandates ourselves. We're going to be adding requirements on top of the requirements. Instead, we're going to be helping to support LEAs in finding ideas and considerations and some guiding principles that could help them legally meet these requirements. Am I understanding that accurately? And maybe that's a better question for Scott, because if we change the word guidance in number one, it really changes what I just think I understand.
Scott, you were the maker of the motion. Did you want to speak to this? Speak to her question?
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to. I do think that the main intent and the whole reason for this motion is to have us generate requirements in conjunction with the health department that apply to schools. And if we change that to guidance, then I'm not sure that we go anywhere, that we add anything to the conversation. I see that the guidance that's been issued, which has been adopted by the governor's order and made mandatory, has some big holes in it. For example, the distancing guidance that board member Cindy just talked about. It says 6 feet or as reasonably possible. In schools, the conversation, I think, may go at like this with the health departments. We would say 6 feet is really difficult in our schools. Is there a minimum requirement that we can agree to and publish for the schools? For example, 4 feet. If they say yes, 4 feet would be a good minimum requirement, we can publish that for the schools, and then they can make plans as to how to schedule their classes, how many kids can be in one room, whether kids need to go into a gymnasium or a cafeteria for part of the day. They'll have something to work with. Right now, that as reasonably possible part of it makes it so we can't function, we can't plan, we can't move forward very well, and we will have a hodgepodge across the state. Even if the schools are in the same color, they may have very different environments inside the school, which doesn't make good sense to me. And I don't think it made good sense to the health department as they listened to and participate in that conversation yesterday. So I really feel it's important that this be more than guidance, that it be requirements, and that the health department are the ones who sign off on that with our input. So we say, for example, masks. What does this look like in schools? At what grade level or what age is this appropriate? We give them the input, they agree or disagree, and then we publish that as a requirement, and then we can get started with our planning and moving forward. So thank you.
Hey, got quite a few hands still up, and I usually don't dive into a lot of the conversation with any input, but I want to speak someone in favor of the proposed amendment, because every LEA that I've talked to, and I represent quite a large number of them in my voting district, but I've communicated throughout the whole state. I do not know of one LEA out there that's saying, give me more requirements. But I would like to have some consistent guidance on what something might want to look like. As a state board member, as this dialogue was rolling out of being in the requirement side, I don't see any expertise on this board, and myself also as a board member, that is in any position to create requirements around this pandemic of face mask, how many, when to be weared, what fabric, what material, and etc. My understanding, we're in the education business, and those other folks on the health and safety side of this are the ones that are the experts. And then as I've tracked in other states and the evolution that's been going on, every couple of weeks there seems to be something new. And if I'm making requirements along the way, then I've got to have a board meeting almost every week to update the evolution of the requirements. In the beginning, this was all about guidance and how do we send out consistent information to assist our local boards in making the best decision for their LEAs. And not all schools are created equal. They don't have the same social imprint of numbers of kids or students per square foot and etc. And I'm all for allowing them to have that local control, that they figure out, knowing and using their best resources of what public education's looking like, and then respecting those that have these other authorities and their expertise in the mandates that they're rolling out on the things that they're the expert at. And so I like the guidance side. That's where I was hoping it would go. And I'm not in favor of creating additional restrictions and another line of bureaucracy of what right looks like on the requirements as this unfolds and we continue to get more information. So I'm off my soapbox now. Board Member Gravitt.
Thank you, Chair. Hold on. I appreciate your comments, especially saying that, you know, none of us are experts, but I think that's why you go back to, we will be working with state and local departments of health. And I just want to say that in the LEAs that I have talked to, and personally in my school, I don't see the requirements as oppressive. To me, I see the requirements as a teacher as these are minimum guidelines. I mean, these are minimum requirements. And then from there, I can make decisions. Like, to me, that's so useful. And so I would just stand by the original motion from Board Member Hanson, and I speak in favor of that original motion. Thank you.
Okay. Superintendent, you have your hand up, Superintendent Dixon.
I did. Thank you. I just wanted to comment on both Board Member Davis and Board Member Hanson's comments, just to clarify for the board and the public. We are at the table with local and state health, and I just want to link us back to an earlier presentation when we were talking about the graphic organizer. You might remember that pyramid and those various functions that we talked about last week. You might recall in that executive function, we talked about Utah leads, but I just want to play that out a little more. When that document was put together, that was an economic document. So the people at the table were really thinking more broadly and economically, and education was intentionally not part of that. What happened then was schools started looking at that guidance document and wondering about distancing and numbers of kiddos in the school and how all hygiene, how all of that applied to them. So education was added, and higher education worked with the Levitt Group to develop their own guidance so that it could be really clear how it was different than, perhaps different or alike than the economic guidance in Utah Leads. So there's some general guidance in there that now is an executive order, and that is pretty high level about hygiene and safety. So just to reiterate, we are in conversations with them. We don't serve on official committees, but they do interact with us now more than ever, especially. What our LEAs are saying they need, we need to know minimally what is required of us. Like if the health department came in and said, you are not doing this, or you must do this, that's what they want, are, whether you call it requirements or guardrails or whatever term is used, they really are saying what is required of us, okay? And then they're also saying, do you have some ideas for instructional structures? Do you have ideas about how we might implement those requirements or guidance or whatever term? So it really is sort of a layered approach that they're looking for. What are those minimum requirements, guardrails, whatever? Then how do is there guidance to help us implement those? And then what other ideas do you have for success? And they're not sitting back. I can tell you that we've moved into summer. They're looking forward for fall, but they're already brainstorming and thinking about how to reopen. And they're just really, really wanting that information, whether it comes from the health department or it's clear in Utah Leads or wherever it comes from. They just want cover on what is required. So I just want everyone to know that we are in conversation. So that's not something that we would start. We're already there, but it's more the development of it in a document that is easily accessible and makes sense to the education community that is specific to them. Hope that clarifies a little bit.
So Superintendent, I've just got a quick question for you then, because you use the word required and guidance several times right here. The requirement piece that what I'm hearing about, that requirement standard, and that is not coming from what the board members, our board members, or our what we perceive as might be a best practice or coming up with that requirement. However, the way that I see this motion, the way this is put together is all of a sudden now we enter that space. And so by entering as this motion, if this motion, not the amendment, but the original motion goes forward, then we will be in the requirement business. So will we be receiving information from the health departments and then we take action and then change the document because of that word requirement? That's my biggest challenge here, is moving forward and managing everyone's expectations with the requirement piece. That's I guess that's my first part of the question. And my thought is, with the way the motion's put together, because it's guidance, it can stay fluid. Requirements means rigid, that we have our meetings, we have our due diligence, we vote as a board member on the requirement. So am I in a wrong space here on the operational side?
Well, I'm not judging right or wrong, sir, but I would just clarify that when we talk about health and safety requirements, to your earlier point about we are not the health experts, so that would come from the state and local health departments. And that's already outlined in a high level way. And that's where I think our schools are reaching out to say, of those things, what is really required of us? So I'll go back and use the I don't know if it was board member Lyra Hansen now, but talking about the spacing. So if it talks about in Utah Leads that people need to be 6 feet apart, well, you can go to a restaurant now and see that they've measured. And the very first thing that happened when Utah Leads came out and it mentioned 6 feet apart, schools started measuring between desks to determine how many kids could be in a class and felt overwhelmed immediately by that. So is that 6 feet apart a requirement or guidance that says do your best efforts? Those are the kinds of things that they are concerned and nervous about, because then it plays out into how they carry out the instructional structures in their school and schedules and everything else. So if the health department, state and or local, say, well, if you can't be 6 or 4 feet apart, then here's some other things to consider. So that's why I keep hearing words like guardrails and requirements from our LEAs. Just tell us what we're allowed to work within. And that, I don't think that's my purview to say that. That has to come from a health perspective.
The health, okay. All right, thank you. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, I'm going to go through the hands again.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And just to clarify, I am 100% in approval of the superintendency and whatever board members working with the health department to inform their conversation. So if they have questions, well, what would this look like in a classroom setting, and helping to inform that. But the requirements need to come from the health department. And I don't agree that we step in if someone else is not. I think we push and say, LEAs need your expertise in our setting. Tell us what the minimum requirements are from the health department. And then we can take those requirements and provide guidance that says, here's some options, here's some ideas, here's what one district did, here's what one school did, providing that guidance that's fluid and it's available to schools as things change, as we have experience with this. This is new for everyone, including the health department. And so it's allowing them to find their feet and recognize what is needed in a time like this. It also allows them to differentiate the difference between statewide requirements and local requirements, and allowing a rural school to figure out how this looks differently than an urban school, where transportation might be a much bigger issue. And so it's how do we recognize? And so I speak highly in favor of the motion that we recognize the place that we have to provide the guidance, to step in and provide that leadership that Board Member Lear talked about, and be very clear, because up to this point, it has just been very vague. But this document provides a lot of clarity, and it recognizes that this guidance is important. Here's how you can apply it. Please contact your local health department and allow them the ability to move forward in their space of providing requirements. I also am concerned that if we get into the space of requirements, what does that look like? Are we going to ask for an assurance document and go out and look at all of these places? What happens if somebody doesn't or makes a mistake as they go forward? Are there consequences? And so when we get into the requirement space, it completely changes it. It changes our accountability to these health and safety recommendations or requirements from the health department. I just think it's important that we stay where we need to stay in our boundaries here.
Superintendent, did you have a follow-up on something?
Yes, I do. And I might imagine that Board Member Earl or Board Member Hanson, Lara Gravitt might clarify this as well. But one of the things that we heard on the call, I just want to clarify, I don't think it's our place as educators to make health decisions, but we're trying to create one document that has all of that in there so that it's clear from the state health level what is required. And we heard that from our local health leaders as well, to rely on them to make all of these individual decisions that are kind of high level around spacing and transportation and masks and some of those things. They do not feel that that is their place, or they're equipped to make some of those high level statewide decisions. What the space that they want to be in is just working school by school on a lot of the other decisions around safety and hygiene. So I think there is a cry for even the local health departments to have the state health department working with us in concert with the Levitt Group and others to say, okay, here are the things that are required, the guardrails. And then we can continue to work with local and state health and LEAs on the guidance. So I just want to be clear that while I say I don't think it's our place to determine what those requirements are, I think we have a space at the table to make our voice heard, and then help guide that state guidance that comes from the state health department.
And thank you. Board Member Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. Just listening to the part of the conversation, I visited with Scott Hansen this morning for a little while about it and that, but I just think that the requirements coming from us, number one, generates two problems. For me, that almost starts up a whole new sector of the Board of Education's office that we've got to have now to manage and to run that. And for the next few months and maybe years, as we go through this process no one's been through before, we start to have meetings about that in order to change our document as we find out more information about the virus and what's going on in the world and best practices from everywhere else. And at the same time, it still goes with what Brittany Cummins has talked to us about, and that's the fact that we should be a warehouse of information. We should be giving that, flowing it down to the schools and allowing the LEAs to work in their own space with what they have. An example that I gave Scott this morning is how schools can't handle the same thing with just the shotgun approach coming from one place, and that's the fact that you have small school districts or small school buildings in the West Desert that house everybody from kindergarten to on up into the high school age students. And if you're going to require one building to wear them and one to not, if you're in that situation, okay, who wears them, who doesn't, and who has to make all that up? And that, I think that just makes it confusing for that. We should be information givers for the health department as they make that decision, say, hey, whoa, that's 6 feet apart. We don't have enough school buildings in the state to do that, even if we do split schedules or whatever. This is what we need to have you look at and give us advice on. I think we should get information from them to do that, but I think we should be information givers and information sharers, but I don't think we should be requirers of anything. The whole start of this came from a requirement from the health department, the governor, the president, however you want to go up the line from, that according to health officials, we will be doing this, this will be required. And I think we need to stay out of the requirement business because this isn't our area for that. But yes, we should be givers of consistent information as in schools, this is what this would look like according to the health department requirements. So I would encourage you to vote for the amendment and allow us to be givers of information and not requirers. Thank you.
Okay. Board member, I'm not seeing hands coming back down. Board member Davis? Did you have more to add to this proposed amendment discussion?
I do, thank you. I have an amendment to the amendment.
Okay.
Item number 1 would read, to move forward in working with the state and local departments of health to clearly define their minimum statewide health and safety requirements and create guidance for LEAs for each of the Utah Leads Together phased health guidelines applicable to schools by color-coded risk level. Speak to the motion.
Is there a second to the proposed amendment?
Jenny Gravett, second.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Board member Davis to speak to the motion, please.
Yes, thank you. I think that this amendment to the amendment clarifies that we will have input and some voice as long as the health department is open to that, and I've been told they are. That we will have voice and offerings to give to them from an educational perspective. They'll add that to all of the science and information and health information that they have, and they will publish and determine the requirements for these color phases. Once they have published the requirements for the public for the different phases, we will add as a state school board guidance, which includes considerations for LEAs as they make their very specific local requirements that may look different in each of their areas depending on their situations. I think that this is coming to a middle ground from the big discussion we've just had. I think this would be a good direction to go.
Okay. Discussion to the proposed amendment. Board member Earl.
Thank you. I think the key thing here on number 1 is that we have the word working with the health department in this, and I do appreciate it if we've got to define it as their minimum standards. And the other key thing is it is minimum standards. Which minimum things are we required to do? And then the other thing is clearly coming out of the meeting the other day, they did want our input. That was very clear. The health department, as well as others, wanted input from us. We are the experts in education, right? That's what we do. They're the experts in health. So they have one hat that they wear. We have a hat we wear, and we're trying to weave those together to create an open dialogue and clarity for our education system and for our parents going into next year. So I am speaking in favor of Cindy's motion, and I just wondered, do we have to vote on the one motion before we add another? No, we don't. Okay, just thinking. It seems like we're layering.
We're amending an amendment. We're going to run out of amendments to the amendments. So this is a it either adds to or take away, and this adds to. So we're
Okay.
in compliance. So,
Okay, gotcha.
okay, thank you. Board Member Hanson, for speaking to the amendment to the amendment.
Thanks, Chair. Just one second. Excuse me. I will speak and then probably propose an amendment to the amendment to the amendment, or wherever we are. I certainly agree with the addition of the word "there" to clarify that these are health department standards. That's been the intent all the way along. I do not, and I'll speak against adding the word "guidance" to this, because it was clear from our meeting with the health department that we need to have requirements that go out to the schools. And if we don't step into that void and help, if we wait for the health department to publish a new version of their phases, this will not happen in a timely fashion. We need to have those requirements created in consultation with the health department, and then we need to get those out to the schools. We will overwhelm the local health authorities and the schools if we don't do that, if we don't provide real requirements instead of just guidance. And that was clear. The Salt Lake local health department, I believe, said that they hadn't been working with the schools yet. They were waiting for something to come to get things moving. Not sure if I can clarify further than that, but my amendment to the amendment would be to drop create guidance for LEAs. So, and create guidance. So it reads, define their minimum statewide health and safety requirements for LEAs for each of those, and then continue on.
So, Ms. Lorraine, are we in compliance if we add an additional amendment to the amendment?
No, at this point, you can only add one amendment to the amendment. So it gets just too confusing. So you would have to vote on Cindy's amendment first before another.
You can hijack a motion with an amendment, and then you can hijack it again with an additional, and then you're limited. So we can certainly come back to more amendments. So
if that's the case procedurally, then I'll speak in favor of Cindy's amendment, and then I'll raise my motion to amend that.
I'm going to go down the list here. Board Member Earl spoke to it. Board Member Hanson, Board Member or Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
She just spoke.
I speak in favor of this amendment. I think it clarifies the role of who's making the requirements and allows us to continue with the documentation that has been proposed by staff and those board members who worked on it. I think it's a great opportunity to move forward with filling in those holes where the considerations and guidance for local consideration need to go. So I speak in favor of this.
Okay, Board Member Lear.
Thank you. I want to clarify a couple of things. I could live with this change. It's better than it was before. But interestingly, all 4 of the individuals, and 5 counting the superintendent, who were on the phone call with the health departments, support this change. We heard from them their plea to tell us what schools look like. That's where you folks are the experts. We absolutely recognize that the health departments were the experts in health decisions and the phases of yellow, orange, green, blue, whatever they are. We absolutely recognize that, but they were all very unwilling and very uncomfortable with saying what that should mean in schools. So the health departments would be the decision makers. It would be their decisions about green, red, blue, purple, whatever, and then the state board's minimum requirements would be to inform what those levels look like in schools. I've got to say, if we leave it as guidance, throughout, I'm the attorney who's going to argue to a school district who wants to do something else, or a school that can only afford to do something. Hey, it's just guidance. It's not a requirement. And this is what the feds are arguing right now about in sexual harassment laws. There's non-regulatory guidance, and many states are saying, thank you very much. We don't have to do it. It's only guidance. So there is a very distinct difference between a word that means requirements and guidance or guardrails or guiding information or considerations. And I think we should decide who we want to be. Mark, as much as I respect you as a local board member, I think that providing information that's more detailed based on the levels set by the health department, the health experts, is helpful to LEAs, not conflicting or burdensome. We have 100 and some odd rules, many of which have no consequences listed in the rule. It's just, this is what it is, and this is what you can rely on, as opposed to here's some guidance, which is not something they can take to the bank.
Board Member
So
Davis?
I support Cindy's, to conclude, I support Cindy's motion. Always the great compromise there. I would go further.
Board Member Davis? Your hand was up? Board Member Cindy Davis, did you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm wondering if someone maybe who attended the meeting could help clarify what I'm hearing said from Board Member Lear's comments is that the State Department would actually get rid of the section that says schools for K-12 specifically, they would just do their basic general guidance for all businesses, organizations, everything. And then that school specific part that they currently have would go away. And we, as a whole state school board, would create legally binding mandates that somehow would then go back and be part of the executive order, or maybe just part of board policy. So maybe I'm misunderstanding. What my amendment says is that we as a state school board would provide an educational perspective to the state health department so that they can flesh out that paradigm as they are studying science and making legally binding requirements by executive orders for schools. Then once those are made and they've made those decisions, we come in as a state school board and provide guidance to our LEAs as to how they can accomplish meeting these legal requirements. Here are 10 ideas. You could probably pick 4, and that would meet this requirement. That's the intention of my amendment. And I don't, maybe my understanding is missing what the others are saying. But it's true what Board Member Lear said, that we are going to go and make all the mandates. Then why don't we just get rid of number 1 and not meet with the health department at all? They'll just do their basics, and then we'll do everything required for schools.
Board Member Dixon, you were in on the meeting. I see your hand is raised. I believe you have a comment.
Oh, I don't want to be elevated to a board member. I'll keep my role. That's tough enough. Yeah, I want to make sure that, again, the board and the public understand that the local health departments are not sitting back and not engaging with local health or local school districts and charters. They are, especially with our districts, and they've been working with them on summer. They're at the table. Again, I think it's how Board Member Davis described it, with what they're looking for are those state-specific binding requirements that they can then default to as a state, because they don't want to be in the position of 13 individual health departments trying to determine statewide guidelines that are consistent. So it's that blend of and balance of local work within guidance, but state requirements that everyone adheres to. And we are anticipating that that would still be reflected in Utah leads, but this broader document that Tiffany showed you is comprehensive of really everything you all have been talking about, so that they're not going to 14 different places trying to figure out what to do. What we showed you that we're asking you to reflect on is a compilation that would reflect state health requirements, guidance about what that could look like, to the way Cindy just described it, and then maybe some instructional structures and other guidance. So it's both a leadership document and one that shows requirements from a legal perspective. I just wanted to mention, though, that locals really are at the table right now. They're not sitting back and not engaging.
Okay, thank you. And then if I might, I was speaking against the original motion, but I am speaking for, I'd like to, just because I spoke against that original motion, as I am in favor of this amendment to the amendment. It does exactly, it addresses all the concerns that I have in moving forward. And I do appreciate all the work and the future work that through the collaboration of USBE, and any board member can weigh in on any concerns in that, and at least, and we're being heard. I appreciate how all that's been put together. We do have an amendment to the amendment before us. Board Member Davis, is your hand up to comment before I'm trying to follow this.
Yes.
Yes, Board Member Davis.
Procedurally, is it possible to add the words as applicable to schools after the word requirements? That was a request by the original.
You know, as a chair, who seconded the amendment? Was that Jim? Without objection, Jenny Earl, are you still good with your second?
Jenny Gravitt.
Jenny Gravitt.
Oh, Jennifer Gravitt. Okay, I didn't. Okay. Are you good with your second?
I am.
Still? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I think we're getting close to voting on the amendment to the amendment, but we do have a slight change. I'm looking to see if there's any hands. Board Member Davis, your hand's still up. Board Member Lear.
Just one more thing to clarify the superintendent's comment. I was not implying that the local health departments were anxious to be helpful. We were all just very, there wasn't a lot of, there was a lot of feeling of siloing. There wasn't, it was very, I felt like that the school people that were on the call were honoring the health department's expertise. The health department folks were saying, those would be your decisions to recommend or to provide direction to the schools you work with. And so I think that we are getting closer to something that will actually be helpful for schools. And I think we were all floundering on that call, all 5 of us, very different people, very different perspectives. We were all floundering to say we respect you as medical professionals, but yes, we do have school expertise. We've actually been in classrooms. We know when it's, we know what kinds of things are possible, and you health department folks don't have that information, and we don't have your medical expertise. So absolutely, I didn't mean to imply they were not engaged. They were just feeling like they were trying to express their expertise, as were we.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Hanson.
And I'll just echo what Carol said. Everyone was eager to help. I think that we were just looking for a way to get this kick-started. And with the amendments that have been made to this, I'm fully in support. I think this will do the job and move us forward the way we need to go. The health departments certainly aren't reticent. We just need something to get the ball moving as related specifically to schools, and this will do it. Thank you.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other hands. So the amendment to the amendment is to add the words under the second paragraph where on that first sentence that says define, to add the word there. And then it would continue to read minimum statewide health and safety. Then we would add requirements as applicable to schools and create. And then the sentence would continue guidance for LEAs for each of the Utah lead together phased health guidelines application for schools by color-coded risk level and. So that's the proposed amendment to the amendment. So we're going to vote on it. All in favor, please vote. Okay, Vice Chair Cummins, I'm seeing this, the voting is unanimous. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, so the motion to amend the amendment passes. So now what's before the board is the amendment that's been amended, which would read that the board authorize Superintendent Dixon and USBE staff with board member involvement. And I'd like how this is broke out. So this is how the motion will carry. Number one, to move forward in working with the state and local departments of health to clearly define their minimum statewide health and safety requirements as applicable to schools and create guidance for LEAs for each of the Utah leads together phased health guidelines applications to school by color-coded risk level. And number two, this is the next paragraph, to continue identifying best practices, developing model policies, and providing purchasing and other assistance related to, quote, healthy and safety, end quote, with a new quote, making education happen, end quote, and other pandemic-related issues in order to provide leadership and support to LEAs for reopening schools. And a new paragraph called number three, that the superintendent shall consult with the board regularly to gather feedback and approvals and update guidance as necessary. That is the amendment. That is the amended amendment to the original motion. I'm going to get my mouse to work here. And I'm not, so any discussion to the motion, the amended motion? I'm seeing none. So an effort not to repeat the amendment to the amended motion, let's vote. All in favor to the amended motion, please vote. The voting is complete and it appears, and the voting is unanimous. Is that how you see it, Vice Chair Cummins?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes and move forward. Thank you, board members, for your good work on this motion. Superintendent, do you have any questions before we move on?
Chair, do we need to, sorry, just a technicality to check with the board secretary, Lorraine, but do we need to take one more vote on the main motion, or is that taken care of now?
That is a very good question. We voted on the amendment. We voted on the amendment to the amendment. We voted on the amendment. So you are absolutely correct. We have one more voting to do. Thank you for calling me on that. Good to have people on top of this. So Ms. Lorraine, Vice Chair Cummins was correct? This is the fun of Robert's rules. So Ms. Lorraine, we've got one more
That's
vote.
correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, so the motion, now I'll be restating the motion again. Please bear with me. The motion before the board is that the board authorizes authorize Superintendent Dixon and USBE staff with board member involvement to the first paragraph, number one, to move forward and work with the state and local departments of health to clearly define their minimum statewide health and safety requirements applicable to schools and create guidelines for LEAs for each of the Utah's leads together phased health guidelines applications for schools by color-coded risk level, and number two, to continue identifying best practices, developing model policies, and providing purchasing and other assistance related to health and safety, making education happen, and other pandemic-related issues in order to provide leadership and support to LEAs for reopening schools. And number three, that the superintendent shall consult with the board regularly to gather feedback and approvals and update guidance as necessary, as amended. Did I say that correct, Ms. Lorraine?
Yes.
Okay. That's a motion before the board. Discussion to the motion, board member Earl. Oh, I lost the hand. Okay. I'm not seeing any discussion to the motion, so let's vote. So please vote at this time. The voting is complete and the voting is unanimous. So this motion carries forward. Thank you. Do you have any questions, Superintendent Dixon?
I do not. Thank you so much to the board members for weighing in on this and for your support.
Okay. And again, thank you for your work on this. Okay. Next, we'll have, this is an information item. This is a budget update for fiscal year 21. And
Chair Huntsman,
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is board member Earl. The FedEx guy came to my door. I wanted to make one more comment real quick. So I apologize.
Well, that dang FedEx man he doesn't get to interfere with our board meeting, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. I know, I apologize for that. I had to run and take real quick. I just had possibly one more motion on that I wanted us to look at. Hopefully it's a quick one. And it has to do with, oh, sorry, I'm out of breath. The items that are under principles, I'm wondering, especially where we're in a time of, this is a, I don't know if crisis is the word, but emergency situation, that we categorize those underneath either continuity of learning or under health and safety. Those should be our top priorities, I feel like. And then these items that are listed here, I think there's 7 or 8 of them, that the things that are listed under there either fall under health and safety or continuity of education or making education happen.
So before we get down into this, I just want to double check with Ms. Lorraine or also Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Our motion, that what was on the table was how we're going to go about managing the reopening guidance document. We did not make a motion on the content of the draft that we have seen here, and I did not see that as a actionable items on our agenda to get into the draft. Am I seeing that correctly, or I just want to make sure we're meeting everyone's expectations of what the motion was, and then also the information that was shared. So to take a motion to change the draft. We haven't, so I'm not sure what you're wanting to do.
I'm asking us that the focus be on those two things during this time of emergency, and that items be listed under those items in place of individual items listed in there.
So
are you suggesting, are you asking me to recommend this for staff?
Yes, my understanding. Yeah, my understanding is with this motion that any concerns that we as board members have regarding this draft or what's out in there, we have access and we pass that right on to the superintendent and staff, because this is a living, it's going to constantly move. So any proposed betterments, we're not bringing this draft back for update. So this is going to continually evolve based on input from the education community, board members, health department, etc. So you have that opportunity to give that input. I believe somebody, Vice Chair Cummins or Ms. Lorraine or Superintendent, if you want to weigh in, that's how I see that this passed. Vice Chair Cummins, do you have a comment to see if I'm on base here or not?
Yeah, I guess the question then becomes if staff is then obligated to incorporate any and all recommendations from board members. It puts staff in kind of a difficult position of making decisions on what to incorporate and what not to incorporate. And so I don't know the best route forward, but to just, I guess maybe recognizing that if we do provide input, that not everything would be possibly considered, or if there is something that needs to be considered. Anyways, it's kind of a tough position that we put staff in when we say it's a living, breathing document, but then we invite input from board members. And is there an expectation that everything that we say will be incorporated?
And this is, yeah, and that's where that first line and the authorization we just voted and gave was to the superintendent and staff, and the staff works for the superintendent to keep this document up and alive and moving. Was that helpful at all, Board Member Earl? So
yeah, I have sent in feedback. Staff's been great to work with. I'm not questioning that. I guess I'm interested in maybe a motion, but from what you're saying, it doesn't fall to alignment today of making that focus on, especially we're in an emergency situation where it's only on two things instead of a broad range of things, and that all those other items fall under those categories. I guess what you're saying is to work with staff on that. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct. And I mean, that's how we just passed our motion of how we are going to operate until we bring this back or change it.
Okay, thank you. I won't take any more time then. Appreciate the clarification.
But we value your input, so your input, please, and we invite that, and it's continuing to be invited based on the motion.
Chair?
Yes. Who's this? That's right there.
Scott Hansen.
Scott Hansen.
Yeah. Sorry, you probably couldn't see my hand. I do believe
I was moving to the next agenda item, and I thought we were off this with a vote, but go ahead.
I do believe that in the motion, we say that the superintendent shall consult with the board regularly to gather feedback and approvals and update requirements and guidance as necessary. I anticipated that before this first draft, after the meeting with the health department and before the first draft is formally published, that would come back to the board. Is that not the way that we're seeing it?
I'm seeing it as I'm reading this, that as long as that's out there, that, like for an example, we have a meeting next Thursday, that this will probably most likely be an agenda item, that so feedback can come in a board meeting or offline, I mean, or just as emails or text, but that's how I see it. But I did not, the way this motion is, we're not approving a final document the way that this was crafted. And I thought it was purposely crafted actually by you, that this is constantly moving and evolving with that requirement in number 3, that the superintendent will constantly update the board in either board meetings or in letters or something as this evolves.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we see this as being an ongoing agenda item for our weekly meetings.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noted. Board Member Lear.
No, sorry.
All right, I'm just looking at checks and yours shows as a hand. All right, we're moving on.